A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. The Awakening Dawn. The ancient grandfather clock in the orphanage hallway chimed midnight, its deep resonance echoing through the corridors like a funeral bell. Kira Thorne pressed her palm against the cool window glass, watching the full moon cast silver shadows across the courtyard below. 23 years old today. Another birthday spent alone. Another year of questions without answers. She had always felt different from the other children who had passed through the orphanage of the Lost Lands. While they played and laughed, she found solace in the library, poring over dusty tomes about bloodlines and ancient histories. While they spoke of families they remembered, she could only recall fragments. The scent of lavender in her mother's hair, her father's gentle laugh, and then fire. Always. Fire. The clock's final chime died away, and something shifted inside her chest. A warmth that had nothing to do with the summer night began to spread through her veins, starting from her heart and radiating outward like liquid starlight. Kira gasped, stumbling backward from the window as her vision blurred. Pain lanced through her skull, and suddenly she wasn't in the orphanage anymore. She was 5 years old again, hiding in a closet while orange flames devoured everything she had ever known. But this time, she could see more than just the fire. Dark figures moved through the smoke, chanting in a language that made her soul recoil. One of them, a woman with silver hair and eyes like black ice, pressed her hand against young Kira's forehead. "Sleep, little guardian," the woman whispered, her voice like winter wind. "Sleep until the stars call you home." The vision shattered, leaving Kira gasping on her bedroom floor. Her hands were glowing with a soft, pearl-white light that pulsed with each heartbeat. As she watched in amazement and terror, the wilted flowers on her windowsill began to straighten, their brown petals flushing with vibrant color. The crack in her bedroom wall sealed itself with a sound like a gentle sigh. Her birthmark, a crescent moon shape on her left shoulder that had always been pale and barely visible, now gleamed like molten silver against her skin. The mark that the caretakers had always dismissed as a strange birthmark was burning with ethereal light. Kira struggled to her feet, her legs unsteady. Through her window, she could see the entire courtyard transforming. Grass grew greener, flowers bloomed in impossible profusion, and even the ancient oak tree that had been dying for years was sprouting new leaves. The power flowing through her was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. "What's happening to me?" she whispered to the empty room. As if in answer, a distant howl echoed across the night sky. It wasn't the call of any ordinary wolf. This sound resonated in her bones, making her soul sing with recognition. Somewhere out there, something was calling to her. Something that had been waiting for this moment just as long as she had. The euphoria of discovery was short-lived. Through her enhanced senses, she caught the sound of vehicles approaching the orphanage. Multiple engines, moving with purpose rather than casual travel. Her newly awakened instincts screamed danger. Kira moved to the window and peered out at the road leading to the orphanage. 3 black SUVs were approaching, their headlights cutting through the darkness like predatory eyes. Even at this distance, she could sense the malevolent intent of their occupants. Her heart hammered against her ribs as fragments of memory surfaced. Not from the fire this time, but from her research. She had spent years in the city library, investigating the mysterious deaths of young, powerful alphas. In the past 6 months alone, 3 had died on their 29th birthdays, each death occurring during a new moon, each victim at the peak of their supernatural strength. The pattern had obsessed her, though she hadn't understood why. Now, as power thrummed through her veins and her crescent birthmark continued to pulse with silver light, understanding struck her like lightning. She wasn't just researching random deaths. She had been preparing for something. Her 23rd birthday wasn't arbitrary. It was the day her true nature would awaken. The vehicles were closer now, and she could hear doors slamming, boots on gravel, rough voices carried on the night air, speaking in the same ancient language from her vision. "Find the girl with the lunar mark," one of them commanded. "The circle has been waiting 20 years for this night." Terror gave her clarity. These weren't random attackers. They were connected to her parents' death, to the woman with silver hair who had put her to sleep. They had been watching, waiting for her powers to manifest, and now they were here to finish what they had started. Kira grabbed the small backpack she had always kept ready by her bed, a habit born from years of institutional living and foster placements that had never worked out. She stuffed it with her few precious possessions, her parents' wedding rings, the journal where she had recorded her research, and the one photograph she had of her family. The front door of the orphanage exploded inward with a crash that shook the entire building. Footsteps pounded up the stairs as Kira slipped out her bedroom window onto the ancient fire escape. Her enhanced senses picked up every detail with crystal clarity. The metallic scent of weapons, the supernatural strength of her pursuers, the way shadows seemed to bend toward them as they moved. She climbed down as quickly and quietly as possible, but her pursuers were already in her room. She heard furniture being overturned, her belongings scattered. "She's not here," a gravelly voice snarled. "Check the other rooms. She can't have gone far. The awakening will make her weak at first." But they were wrong. Instead of weakness, Kira felt more alive than she had in her entire life. The mysterious pull she had always felt toward the Northern Territories was stronger now, like a compass needle pointing toward true north. Every instinct told her to run in that direction, toward whatever was calling to her. She reached the ground and sprinted across the courtyard, her bare feet silent on the grass. Behind her, she could hear windows breaking as her hunters searched every room. The iron gates of the orphanage loomed ahead, locked as always. But that didn't matter now. Her newfound strength made the 10-foot barrier feel conquerable. As she climbed, her fingers found purchase in places that should have been impossible to grip. At the top, she paused for just a moment to look back at the only home she had ever known. Light blazed from every window as the mercenaries continued their search, and she knew with bone-deep certainty that she could never return. The pull northward intensified, and she followed it into the forest beyond the orphanage grounds. Behind her, shouts of frustration echoed as her pursuers realized she had escaped. But she was already running, following the invisible thread that connected her to her destiny. The Black Ridge territory called to her through the darkness, and Kira Thorne ran toward whatever awaited her there. Chapter 2. The Blackwater Conspiracy. The forest floor was soft beneath Kira's feet as she ran through the pre-dawn darkness, following the invisible pull that grew stronger with each mile. Her newly awakened senses painted the world in vivid detail. Every rustling leaf, every night creature's heartbeat, every whisper of wind through the ancient pines. The crescent mark on her shoulder continued to pulse with silver light, a beacon that seemed to guide her steps. After hours of running without fatigue, she finally saw lights ahead. Not the harsh glare of her pursuers' vehicles, but the warm glow of a settlement. A wooden sign emerged from the shadows. Black Ridge Territory, Protected Lands. Below it, smaller text warned, "Trespassers will be dealt with, according to pack law." The pull in her chest intensified, confirming what her instincts already knew. This was where she belonged. But before she could take another step, dark shapes materialized from the tree line. "Stop right there." The command came from a tall man with military bearing and predatory grace. Two others flanked him, their eyes glowing amber in the moonlight. "State your business in Black Ridge Territory." Kira's hands trembled as she raised them slowly. I'm seeking sanctuary. There are people hunting me." The patrol leader's nostrils flared as he scented the air. His expression shifted from suspicion to something closer to awe. "Bring her to the Alpha, now." They escorted her through winding paths that led to an impressive stone fortress nestled against the mountainside. The Black Ridge stronghold radiated power and ancient strength, its towers reaching toward the star-filled sky like fingers grasping for heaven. The massive oak doors opened before they reached them, and Kira's breath caught in her throat. The man standing in the doorway was everything an alpha should be. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see straight through her soul. But there were lines of strain around those eyes, a tension in his powerful frame that spoke of burdens carried too long. "Damon Blackridge," he said simply, his voice a low rumble that resonated in her bones. "And you are?" "Kira Thorne." The name felt strange on her lips, as if it belonged to someone else, someone who hadn't just discovered she was something more than human. His gaze lingered on the silver light emanating from her birthmark, visible through her thin nightgown. 23 years old, I'd guess. Born on the summer solstice. How did you... Lucky guess. But his expression suggested it was anything but luck. You're bleeding. She looked down, surprised to see scratches from her flight through the forest marking her arms and legs. Before she could respond, he stepped closer. And the scent of him, pine, leather, and something indefinably male, made her pulse race. I don't submit to alphas, she said suddenly, the words coming from somewhere deep inside her. It was a challenge, one that made his patrol guards tense visibly. Damon's eyebrows rose slightly. Interesting. He gestured for his men to step back. No one has resisted my authority in over a decade. Maybe they just didn't try hard enough. A ghost of a smile crossed his features. Come inside. We have much to discuss. As they entered the great hall, another man approached. Roughly 30 years old, with calculating green eyes and prematurely silver-streaked hair. His bearing suggested high rank, but something about him made Kira's newly sensitive instincts prickle with unease. Alpha, the man said, his tone respectful but tinged with disapproval. Perhaps this isn't the wisest time to welcome strangers, given our circumstances. Came Blackwater, my second, Damon introduced, though his gaze never left Kira's face. And this is hardly a normal stranger. Kame's eyes narrowed as he studied Kira. Indeed, the territory has been under increasing pressure from external threats. Young alphas from neighboring regions have been dying under mysterious circumstances. Just last month, Alpha Morrison was found dead on his 29th birthday. No signs of violence, no explanation. Kira's heart skipped. Morrison had been one of the names in her research. I know about the deaths. I've been investigating them. Both men's attention sharpened dangerously. Investigating. Kame's voice carried a warning edge. And what exactly have you discovered? A pattern. 3 deaths in 6 months. All powerful alphas. All 29 years old. All during new moons. She met Kame's suspicious gaze steadily. I think something is hunting alpha bloodlines. Kame stepped forward, his supernatural presence pressing against her like a physical weight. But unlike with Damon, she felt no pull to submit. If anything, his dominance attempt felt wrong, artificial. Convenient that you appear on our doorstep with such knowledge, Kayim said, his tone dangerously soft. One might wonder about your true motivations. Kayim. Damon's single word carried enough authority to make his second step back, but Kira caught the flash of resentment in the other man's eyes. With respect, Alpha. We cannot afford to be careless. The territory needs stable leadership, especially now. Kame's gaze flicked meaningfully toward Damon. Distractions can be deadly. Something in his tone made Kira study him more carefully. There was ambition there, carefully hidden, but unmistakable to her enhanced senses. And something else, the same wrongness she had felt when resisting his dominance, as if his supernatural presence was somehow incomplete. The young woman will remain as our guest while we determine the nature of the threat against her, Damon decided. Assign her quarters in the East Wing. Alpha, surely the dungeons would be more appropriate until we verify. The East Wing came. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Are my orders unclear? Kayim bowed his head, but not before Kira caught another flash of that carefully hidden resentment. Of course, Alpha. Your word is law. As arrangements were made for her accommodation, Kira found herself studying the dynamics between the two men. On the surface, Kayim appeared to be the perfect second. Respectful, concerned for the territory's welfare, protective of his alpha. But underneath, she sensed currents of dissatisfaction and barely leashed ambition. When Kayim moved to escort her to her rooms, he leaned close enough for his words to reach her ears alone. Alphas have been dying, girl. And now you arrive with convenient knowledge and convenient timing. If you bring harm to this territory or our alpha, there will be consequences. His threat should have terrified her. Instead, it only confirmed her growing suspicions. There was something fundamentally wrong with Kayim Blackwater, something that set her teeth on edge in a way that had nothing to do with his obvious dislike of her presence. I'm not here to harm anyone, she replied quietly, but I won't be threatened either. His eyes flashed with something dangerous. We'll see about that. As he led her through the corridors of the ancient fortress, Kira's mind raced. The mysterious deaths, her awakening powers, the call that had led her specifically to Blackridge territory. None of it was coincidence. She was part of something larger, something that had been set in motion 20 years ago when her parents died. And somehow, she suspected Caim Blackwater knew more about that connection than he was letting on. The East Wing was comfortable, but clearly designed to keep guests under observation. As Caim left her with warnings about staying in designated areas, Kira moved to the window and looked out over the territory that had called to her. Somewhere in this stronghold was the key to understanding what she was becoming. But first, she would need to navigate the dangerous political currents she could already sense swirling around her. The Alpha had shown her mercy and protection. His second viewed her as a threat to be eliminated. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the fortress walls, her enemies were still hunting. Chapter 3. Hidden Truths. Dawn painted the Blackridge territory in shades of gold and amber as Kira woke from the first peaceful sleep she'd had in years. The ancient fortress seemed to hum with protective energy, and for the first time since her awakening, the constant tension in her shoulders had eased. But her respite was short-lived. A knock at her door interrupted her morning routine. "Miss Thorne? Alpha Damon requests your presence in the library." The library proved to be a magnificent chamber with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound volumes, many bearing the distinctive scent of age and power. Damon stood before a massive window, silhouetted against the morning light. Even in casual clothing, he radiated the kind of authority that came from generations of leadership. "I trust you slept well?" he asked without turning around. "Better than I have in years." She moved closer, drawn by the same magnetic pull that had led her to his territory. "Thank you for the sanctuary." He turned then, and she was struck again by the weight of exhaustion in his blue eyes. In daylight, she could see the subtle signs of strain, the tightness around his eyes, the way he held himself as if fighting constant pain. "Tell me about your research," he said, gesturing toward a table covered with ancient texts. "These deaths you've been investigating." Kira settled into a chair across from him, acutely aware of how his presence affected her. "It started as curiosity. I've always been drawn to genealogies, bloodline records. But these deaths, they felt personal somehow." She opened her journal, pages filled with meticulous notes and family trees. Alpha Morrison, 29, found dead in his study with no signs of struggle. Alpha Garrett from the Western Reaches, 29, collapsed during a pack meeting. Alpha Sebastian from the Southern Territories, 29, died in his sleep. Damon's expression grew increasingly grim as she continued. All of them were known for exceptional strength, all from powerful bloodlines, and all died exactly on their 29th birthday during a new moon. You see the pattern. More than that. She traced a finger along one of the genealogical charts. "I think I see the connection." Each of these families had historical conflicts with something called the Shadow Circle centuries ago. The ancient book in Damon's hands slammed shut with enough force to make her jump. "Where did you hear that name?" "It's mentioned in several historical accounts, always in reference to some kind of cult that fed on supernatural power. The records are fragmentary, but nothing." His voice carried an edge of command that made her spine straighten instinctively. "The Shadow Circle is a myth, a story told to frighten children." Despite the authority in his voice, Kira found herself resisting. The evidence suggests otherwise. These deaths aren't random, and they aren't natural. Before Damon could respond, Caim Blackwater entered the library with the measured steps of someone who had been listening at the door. "Forgive the interruption, Alpha, but we have pressing territory matters to discuss." Kira caught the meaningful look that passed between the two men, a reminder that Damon had responsibilities beyond entertaining a mysterious refugee. But she also noticed how Caim's gaze lingered on her open journal, his eyes scanning the information she had shared with calculating interest. "Of course." Damon's tone was carefully neutral. "Kira, perhaps you could continue your research here while Caim and I attend to business." As the two men moved toward the door, Kira heard fragments of their conversation. Something about patrol schedules and border security. But what caught her attention was Caim's comment. "We cannot afford to appear weak, Alpha. Other territories are watching for signs of instability. The door closed behind them, leaving Kira alone with her thoughts and the vast collection of Blackridge family histories. She had intended to continue her research, but instead found herself drawn to a section of genealogical records that made her breath catch. The Blackridge bloodline showed the same pattern as the other families: a history of conflict with the shadow circle, and a disturbing trend of male heirs dying young. Generation after generation, the firstborn sons died before their 30th birthday, always under mysterious circumstances. Her hands trembled as she traced the family tree down to the current generation. Damon Blackridge, born 28 years and 8 months ago. If the pattern held true, he had less than 4 months to live. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. The exhaustion she had noticed, the strain in his eyes. He knew he was living under a death sentence, watching the calendar count down to his inevitable end. Fascinating reading? Kira spun to find Chaim standing in the doorway, having returned far sooner than expected. His green eyes held a calculating gleam that sent warning signals through her enhanced senses. "Just trying to understand the history," she replied carefully. "These bloodline records are remarkably detailed." "Indeed they are." He moved closer, his presence somehow oppressive in the vast library. "Tell me, Miss Thorne, what exactly were you doing in that orphanage? It's quite a coincidence. A researcher of supernatural genealogies growing up so close to territories that have been affected by recent tragedies." The accusation in his tone was unmistakable. "I was trying to survive, just like any other orphan." He picked up one of her research notes, studying it with the air of someone looking for evidence of guilt. "And your sudden appearance here, just as our alpha faces his own challenges? Another coincidence?" Kira's temper flared, though she kept her voice level. "What exactly are you implying, Mr. Blackwater?" "I'm implying that your timing is suspiciously convenient. Young alphas are dying, and you arrive with extensive knowledge of their deaths. Some might consider that cause for concern." Before she could respond, he moved closer, using his supernatural presence to try to intimidate her. But instead of submission, Kira felt only a growing certainty that something was fundamentally wrong with this man. "You don't trust me," she observed. "But then, trust seems to be in short supply around here." His eyes narrowed dangerously. "The territory's security is my responsibility. Alpha Damon is generous with his trust. Sometimes too generous." There was something in his tone, a possessiveness that went beyond loyalty to territory, as if he viewed Damon's generosity not as a virtue, but as a weakness to be corrected. "He's dying, isn't he?" The words left her lips before she could stop them. Chaim's expression shifted, surprise replacing calculation. "What makes you say that?" "The family records. The pattern. Every firstborn Blackridge male dies before 30, and he's 28. She gestured toward the genealogical charts. "How long have you known?" For a moment, something almost like genuine emotion flickered across Chaim's features. "Since we were children. We all knew. And you're what? Waiting for him to die so you can take over?" The accusation hung in the air between them like a blade. Chaim's supernatural aura flared dangerously, pressing against her with enough force to bring most people to their knees. But Kira stood her ground, her own newly awakened power rising to meet his challenge. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "I have served this territory and this alpha faithfully for over a decade. Everything I do is for the protection of our people, including undermining his authority with subtle comments about instability." His eyes flashed with something that might have been respect, before the mask of polite deference slipped back into place. "You're more observant than I gave you credit for." The admission sent a chill down her spine. Whatever game Calm was playing, it was more complex than simple ambition. There was something deeper here, something that connected to the mysterious deaths and her own awakening. "Tell me about the shadow circle," she said suddenly. This time, his reaction was unmistakable. A flicker of fear quickly suppressed, followed by something that looked almost like guilt. "There's nothing to tell. They're a myth." "You're lying. Be very careful, Miss Thorne." His voice carried the weight of real threat now. "This territory has ways of dealing with those who spread dangerous rumors. Before she could respond, the library door opened and Damon returned, his presence immediately shifting the dynamics in the room. Whatever tension had been building between Kira and Kayam evaporated under the Alpha's commanding aura. "Is everything all right?" Damon's gaze moved between them, clearly sensing the undercurrents of conflict. "Just getting acquainted," Kayam replied smoothly. "Miss Thorne has some interesting theories about recent events." Damon's attention fixed on her, and she found herself caught between the desire to share what she had discovered and the warning in Kayam's eyes. Something was very wrong here, but she wasn't sure who she could trust. "Perhaps we could discuss those theories over dinner," Damon suggested. "Kayam, would you join us?" "I'm afraid I have patrol duties to attend to," Kayam replied, though his tone suggested the refusal was anything but casual. "But I'm sure Miss Thorne will find the conversation illuminating." As he left, Kira caught his final look, a promise that their conversation was far from over. Chapter 4. Dangerous Alliances. The evening air carried the scent of jasmine and impending storm, as Kira made her way to the private dining room Damon had specified. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival at Blackridge Territory, and the subtle dance of attraction and resistance between them had grown more intense with each passing day. She found him standing on the balcony overlooking the territory, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the darkening sky. Even from behind, she could see the tension that never seemed to leave him, the weight of leadership, the burden of his approaching fate, and something else, something that had grown stronger in her presence. "You came," he said without turning around. "Did you think I wouldn't? With you, I've learned to expect the unexpected." He faced her then, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her pulse quicken. "You don't behave like anyone I've ever met." She moved to stand beside him at the balcony railing, acutely aware of the electricity that sparked whenever they were near each other. "Maybe that's because I'm not like anyone you've ever met." "No," he agreed quietly. "You're not." The dining room had been set for intimacy. Candles flickered on a small table, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. As they settled across from each other, Kira noticed how the warm light softened the harsh lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "Tell me about your family," he said as they began the meal. "Your real family, not the orphanage." The request stirred memories she usually kept buried. "I remember fragments. My mother had the most beautiful laugh, and she used to sing to me in a language I didn't recognize then. My father was gentle but strong. He had hands that could heal wounded animals. Healers run in bloodlines," Damon observed carefully, "as do other gifts." She met his gaze directly. "You know what I am, don't you?" Instead of answering, he reached across the table and traced a finger along her wrist where her pulse jumped wildly. The simple touch sent fire racing through her veins, and she saw his pupils dilate in response to her reaction. "What I know," he said, his voice rough with carefully controlled desire, "is that since you arrived, I've felt more alive than I have in years. The constant pain that's been my companion for months. It lessens when you're near." The admission hung between them like a confession. Kira's enhanced senses caught the acceleration of his heartbeat, the way his supernatural aura seemed to reach for her own awakening power. "Damon," she began, but he shook his head. Don't offer me hope when we both know how this ends." His jaw tightened with controlled anguish. "Every Blackridge Alpha dies before his 30th birthday. It's been that way for 5 generations. What if it doesn't have to be?" Before he could answer, the dining room door burst open. Kayam strode in, his expression urgent but carrying an undertone of something else. Something that made Kira's instincts prickle with warning. "Alpha, forgive the interruption, but we have a situation. The Eastern Patrol reports movement on our borders. Multiple vehicles, armed occupants." Damon was on his feet instantly. The intimate atmosphere shattered. "How many?" "At least a dozen. They're not approaching directly, but they're clearly conducting surveillance." Kayam's gaze flicked to Kira with barely concealed accusation. "It seems your arrival has drawn unwanted attention." The implication was clear. She had brought danger to the territory. But something in Kayam's tone, a satisfaction beneath the concern, made her wonder if the timing was as coincidental as he claimed. "I need to coordinate the defense," Damon said, already moving toward the door. Kira, return to your quarters and remain there until— No, the word left her lips with surprising force. If they're here because of me, I won't hide while others face the danger. You'll do as I command. Damon's alpha authority flared, pressing against her with the weight of absolute dominance. For a moment, she felt the pull to submit, to let his strength shelter her from the approaching threat. But deeper than that instinct was another truth. She was tired of being protected, tired of being a victim of circumstances beyond her control. I won't, she said quietly, meeting his shocked gaze steadily. Not this time. Kayim stepped forward, his supernatural presence adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Alpha, perhaps more direct measures are needed to ensure Miss Thorne's cooperation. Something in his eagerness to see her controlled sent alarm bells ringing through Kira's mind. You'd like that, wouldn't you? She said, studying his face carefully. Me locked away, helpless, while you handle things. I want what's best for the territory, Kayim replied smoothly. But she caught the flash of something darker in his eyes. And what exactly do you think is best? Before he could answer, an explosion echoed from somewhere within the fortress itself. The lights flickered, and the ancient stones trembled with the force of the blast. They're inside the walls, Damon snarled, his protective instincts blazing to life. How is that possible? Kayim's expression shifted to one of careful surprise. But Kira caught something else. A flicker of satisfaction quickly suppressed. It seems they had inside information about our defenses. The accusation in his tone was directed at her. But Kira found herself studying him instead. His shock seemed genuine, but there was something rehearsed about it, as if he had been preparing for exactly this scenario. We need to get to the command center, Damon decided. But as they moved toward the door, another explosion rocked the fortress, this one much closer. The East Wing is under attack, Kame reported, checking some kind of communication device. They're specifically targeting the guest quarters. Kira's blood ran cold. Her room was in the East Wing. If she had followed Damon's command to return there, she would be trapped or dead by now. Almost like they knew exactly where to strike. She murmured, her gaze fixed on Kayim's profile. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Fortunate that you're here instead, but his tone suggested he found it anything but fortunate. As they made their way through the fortress corridors, Kira noticed how Kayim seemed to know exactly which passages were safe, which areas to avoid. Either he was exceptionally good at reading the battle's progress, or he had some other source of information. When they reached a secure communications room, Kayim immediately began coordinating with the various patrol units. His efficiency was impressive, his commands clear and strategic. But Kira caught fragments of his conversations that made her uneasy. Fall back to secondary positions, he ordered one unit. Allow them to advance to the main courtyard. Kayim, Damon's voice carried a warning. We don't retreat in our own territory. Strategic repositioning, Alpha. We can better control the engagement from prepared positions. It sounded reasonable, but something about the way he avoided eye contact made Kira's newly sensitive instincts scream warnings. She moved closer to the window, trying to see the attackers for herself. What she saw made her heart stop. The mercenaries moving through the courtyard wore the same dark uniforms as the men who had attacked the orphanage. But more importantly, they were moving with the confidence of people who knew exactly where they were going. They're not just attacking, she said suddenly. They're herding us, driving us towards specific locations. Damon joined her at the window, his expression growing increasingly grim. She's right. This is too coordinated to be a random assault. Perhaps, Kayim said carefully, we should consider that they have specific objectives. Information they've obtained through various means. Again, his gaze found Kira, the implication clear, but she was no longer listening to his accusations. Her enhanced hearing had picked up something else. A conversation between two of the attackers directly below their window. The Circle wants her alive, one was saying. Blackwater assured us he could deliver her to the designated extraction point. Kira's blood turned to ice. Blackwater. She turned to stare at Kayim, pieces of a horrifying puzzle clicking into place. His green eyes met hers, and for a moment, his mask of loyal concern slipped entirely. What she saw underneath was ambition, calculation, and the cold satisfaction of someone whose carefully laid plans were finally coming to fruition. "You," she whispered. "You're working with them." The accusation hung in the air like a blade. Chaim's hand moved toward the weapon at his side, but Damon's reaction was faster. "Explain," the Alpha commanded, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. "Now." Chaim's expression shifted through several emotions: regret, defiance, and finally, a kind of resigned determination. "Everything I do is for the good of this territory, Alpha. Sometimes that requires difficult choices." The admission was as good as a confession. As understanding dawned on Damon's face, Kira felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The man who had been questioning her loyalty, who had been positioning himself as the territory's protector, had been the traitor all along. And now they were trapped, surrounded by enemies, with nowhere to run. Chapter 5. The Masked Coup. The revelation hung in the air like a death sentence as Chaim's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. His hand rested on his weapon, but his posture had shifted from defensive to openly threatening. Outside, the coordinated attack continued, but now Kira understood it for what it truly was. Not an assault, but an extraction operation. "Difficult choices," Damon repeated, his voice deadly quiet. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as his alpha power flared with barely contained rage. "You call betraying your own pack a difficult choice? I call it survival." Chaim's green eyes held no remorse, only the cold calculation of someone who had planned this moment for months. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I enjoyed watching you slowly die while refusing to consider alternatives?" "What alternatives?" Kira demanded, though part of her already knew the answer would horrify her. Chaim's gaze fixed on her with something that might have been pity. "You, Miss Thorne. You're the alternative. Or rather, your death is." The words hit her like a physical blow, but before she could respond, another explosion shook the fortress. This one was different. More controlled, more precise. Through the window, she could see the attackers had reached the main courtyard exactly as Chaim had orchestrated. "The circle grows stronger with each alpha that dies," Chaim continued, his tone almost conversational despite the chaos surrounding them. "But they've grown impatient. 20 years they've waited for the guardian bloodline to awaken. And now that it has..." "You made a deal with them." Damon's voice carried the weight of absolute betrayal. "You sold out your own alpha for what? Power? For the territory's survival." Chaim's mask slipped entirely, revealing the desperate ambition beneath. "You'll be dead in 4 months regardless. At least this way, the pack lives. The circle gets what they want, and I can guide this territory into a future that doesn't end in extinction." Kira felt sick as the full scope of his betrayal became clear. "You've been feeding them information all along. The patrol schedules, the security weaknesses, everything necessary to ensure a clean extraction with minimal casualties," Chaim confirmed. "I'm not a monster, Miss Thorne. I genuinely hope to spare as many lives as possible." "How considerate," she said, her voice dripping with disgust. "And what exactly did the circle promise you in return for my life?" His expression hardened. "A year of peace. Long enough for Damon to die naturally and for leadership to transfer smoothly. Long enough for the territory to stabilize under new management." The casual way he discussed Damon's death, as if it were already accomplished, made Kira's newly awakened power flare with rage. The air around her began to shimmer with silver light, and she saw both men notice the change. "New management," Damon repeated, his tone dangerously soft. "Meaning you." "Meaning someone who puts the territory's needs above personal attachments," Chaim replied, his gaze flicking meaningfully between Damon and Kira. "Someone who understands that leadership requires sacrifice." Before anyone could respond, the communication device in Chaim's hand crackled to life. "Blackwater, we're in position. Where is the package?" Package. They were talking about her like she was cargo to be delivered. The dehumanization of it made her power surge higher, silver light beginning to dance along her skin. Chaim lifted the device toward his mouth, but Damon moved faster than human reflexes should allow. The Alpha's hand closed around the device, crushing it to pieces before Chaim could respond to his allies. "The only thing being delivered tonight," Damon snarled, is justice. But Chaim had been prepared for this possibility. His own weapon cleared its holster with practiced speed, aimed not at Damon, but at Kira. I truly am sorry it's come to this, Alpha. But the territory's survival is more important than any individual life. Including your own? Kira asked quietly. Something in her tone made both men look at her more carefully. The silver light emanating from her skin had intensified, and her crescent birthmark was glowing so brightly it was visible through her clothing. What are you doing? Chaim demanded, his weapon wavering slightly. Learning, she replied. And suddenly she understood why the circle had waited 20 years for her awakening. The power flowing through her wasn't just healing or empathic connection. It was something far more dangerous. Something that could unravel the very foundations of supernatural authority. She could feel it now, the wrongness in Chaim's supernatural presence that had always bothered her. His alpha-like dominance wasn't natural. It was borrowed, stolen, artificial. And now that she knew what to look for, she could see the source. You're not just working with the circle, she said, her voice filled with dawning horror. You're one of them. The accusation hit like lightning. Chaim's carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing something inhuman beneath. His green eyes flickered with an otherworldly light, and for a moment, his human facade slipped entirely. Impossible, Damon breathed, but his enhanced senses were confirming what Kira had revealed. The scent of him, the texture of his supernatural aura. It was all wrong. Not one of them, Chaim corrected, his voice taking on a different quality now that his deception was exposed. But I've been enhanced by them. 20 years of small rituals, gradual changes. They needed someone inside the pack, someone who could guide events toward their desired outcome. 20 years, Kira repeated, understanding flooding through her. Since my parents died, since the fire, your parents discovered what was happening to the Alpha bloodlines, Chaim confirmed, his weapon still trained on her, but his attention split between multiple threats. They were close to exposing the circle's influence. Their death was necessary. The casual admission of her parents' murder sent Kira's power exploding outward. Silver light filled the room, and she felt something fundamental shift in the supernatural landscape around them. Chaim's borrowed dominance wavered under the assault of her awakening abilities. You killed them, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the stones of the ancient fortress resonate. You've been manipulating events for decades, guiding this territory toward destruction, and now you want to sacrifice me to complete your master's plan. It's not personal, Chaim insisted, but his weapon was shaking now as her power pressed against him. The circle's vision extends beyond individual territories, beyond single lifetimes. They're building something larger, something that will bring order to the chaos of supernatural politics. By murdering alphas and enslaving their people, Damon snarled. His own power was rising now, feeding off Kira's energy in a way that surprised all three of them. The connection between them had always been strong, but now it was something more, a resonance that amplified both their abilities. Chaim's eyes widened as he recognized what was happening. The mate bond, he breathed. You've formed a mate bond with her. That's not possible. She's not pack. She's not even shifter. She's something else entirely, Damon replied, moving to stand beside Kira. Something the circle has been hunting for good reason. Outside, the sounds of battle were intensifying. The extraction team was growing impatient, and soon they would come looking for their inside contact. But the dynamic in the room had shifted dramatically. Last chance, Chaim, Damon offered, though his tone suggested he hoped the traitor would refuse. Surrender now, and I'll make your death quick. Chaim's laugh was bitter and entirely without humor. You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about me anymore. The circle has been planning this for generations. Even if you kill me, even if you escape tonight's extraction, they'll never stop hunting her. His gaze fixed on Kira with something that might have been genuine regret. You represent the end of their immortality, the destruction of everything they've built. They would rather see every supernatural territory burn than allow you to reach your full potential. Before anyone could respond, the door to the communications room exploded inward. Armed figures in dark tactical gear poured through the opening, their movements coordinated and professional. But they weren't alone. Leading them was a woman with silver hair and eyes like black ice. Kira's blood turned to frozen terror as memory crashed over her. This was the woman from her childhood vision, the one who had pressed her hand against young Kira's forehead and whispered words that had stolen 20 years of her life. "Hello, little guardian," the woman said, her voice like winter wind. "It's time to complete what we started." The trap was closing, and Kira realized with growing horror that Qaim's betrayal was only the beginning. The circle had finally come to collect their prize, and they had brought enough force to ensure success. The real battle was about to begin. Chapter 6. The Shadow's Truth. The silver-haired woman stepped into the communications room like death incarnate, her presence sucking the warmth from the air. Behind her, a dozen armed mercenaries formed a semicircle, their weapons trained on Kira with professional precision. But it was the woman's obsidian eyes that held Kira frozen, eyes that had haunted her nightmares for 20 years. "Seraphina Vex," Damon breathed, recognition and revulsion warring in his voice. "I should have known the circle would send their high priestess personally." "Alpha Blackridge," Seraphina replied with mock courtesy, her gaze never leaving Kira's face. "How gratifying to see you've kept our little guardian safe for us. Though I confess, allowing her to awaken was unexpected." The silver light emanating from Kira's skin pulsed brighter at the woman's proximity, as if her very presence was an affront to the power flowing through her veins. "You murdered my parents," Kira said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "I freed them from the burden of watching you fulfill your destiny," Seraphina corrected, stepping closer with predatory grace. "They were weak, too attached to sentimentality to see the greater purpose their daughter would serve." Qaim moved to stand beside his true allies, his weapon still trained on Kira, but his posture now openly aligned with the circle. "The extraction is complete, High Priestess. The territory is secure, and the Alpha is contained." "Is he?" Seraphina's gaze flicked to Damon with amusement. "Tell me, young Alpha, do you feel contained?" The question seemed innocent enough, but Kira felt the supernatural pressure in the room shift dramatically. Damon's power, which had been rising in response to the threat, suddenly wavered. His face went pale, and he stumbled against the wall as if the strength had been drained from his limbs. "What did you do to him?" Kira demanded, moving instinctively to support him. "Nothing permanent," Seraphina assured her with false kindness, "merely accelerated a process that was already underway. You see, the curse on the Blackridge bloodline isn't a natural phenomenon. It's a carefully crafted tool that we've been refining for generations." The revelation hit like a physical blow. "The deaths of the other alphas." "Practice," Seraphina confirmed with chilling satisfaction. "Each death taught us more about how to harvest and concentrate supernatural power. Your dear Alpha here represents the culmination of that research." Damon tried to straighten, his supernatural aura flaring weakly in defiance. But whatever Seraphina had done was sapping his strength at an alarming rate. The pattern," he gasped. 29 years old. "The optimal age for power extraction," the High Priestess explained, as if discussing an academic theory. "Before 30, the Alpha essence is pure, uncorrupted by the weight of extended leadership. After 28, it's reached full maturity. The window is quite specific." Kira's mind raced as pieces of the larger picture fell into place. "You've been breeding them like livestock, engineering bloodlines, manipulating genetics, all to create the perfect harvest." "Breeding is such a crude term," Seraphina mused. "We prefer to think of it as cultivation. Centuries of careful guidance, strategic marriages, selective pressures, all leading to this moment." She gestured toward Kira with something approaching maternal pride. "And you, dear child, represent our greatest achievement. The Guardian bloodline was thought extinct for over 300 years. But we found the last remnant, preserved it, guided its development until it could produce someone like you." The horror of it made Kira's power surge violently. Silver light exploded outward, forcing the mercenaries to shield their eyes, and making Seraphina take an involuntary step backward. You created me, Kira whispered, understanding and revulsion warring in her voice. My entire bloodline, my parents, everything. It was all orchestrated by you. Your parents were a happy accident, Serafina admitted. 2 guardian descendants finding each other naturally, producing a child of unprecedented potential. We simply guided events to ensure optimal development conditions. The orphanage, Damon managed, his voice strained but determined. You arranged for her to grow up there, away from pack influences, away from supernatural training that might have helped her control her abilities. Precisely, the High Priestess confirmed. We needed her power to develop naturally, without the limitations that formal training might have imposed. And we needed her emotional state to be receptive to certain manipulations. Chaim stepped forward, his artificial dominance pressing against Kira's growing power. Enough discussion. The ritual circle is prepared, and the lunar alignment won't wait for our convenience. But Serafina raised a hand, stopping him mid-motion. Patience, my enhanced friend. This moment represents the culmination of decades of planning. I intend to savor it properly. She turned back to Kira, her expression shifting to something that might have been genuine affection if it hadn't been so deeply twisted. Do you know what makes guardian blood so special, child? It's not just the healing abilities or the empathic connections. It's the power to unmake supernatural bonds, to dissolve the very foundations of pack magic. The revelation sent chills down Kira's spine. That's why you need me dead. My existence threatens your control over the supernatural world. Your existence threatens the natural order, Serafina corrected. For 3 centuries, we have maintained balance through careful cultivation of power. We have prevented wars, eliminated chaos, brought stability to a world that would otherwise tear itself apart through primitive territorial disputes. By murdering anyone strong enough to oppose you, Damon snarled, though the effort of speaking clearly cost him. By harvesting power from those too short-sighted to use it properly, the High Priestess replied without a trace of remorse. Every alpha we've claimed has contributed to a greater purpose. Their strength flows through us, allowing us to guide supernatural society toward its proper evolution. Kira felt sick as the full scope of their plan became clear. You're parasites. You've been feeding off the supernatural community for centuries, convincing yourselves that it's for the greater good. We are gardeners, Serafina countered, her voice taking on the fervor of true belief, pruning the wild growth, directing the flow of power toward productive channels. Without our guidance, your kind would have destroyed itself through endless territorial wars centuries ago. But even as she spoke, Kira could feel something changing in the supernatural atmosphere around them. Her power was no longer just growing. It was evolving, reaching toward connections she had never understood before. Through her bond with Damon, she could sense the artificial constraints that had been placed on his bloodline, the subtle manipulations that had guided his family toward their predetermined fate. You made a mistake, she said quietly, her voice carrying harmonics that made the stones of the fortress resonate with power. You let me form a mate bond with him before the extraction. Serafina's confident expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty. The bond is irrelevant. Once the ritual begins, the bond changes everything. Kira continued, her silver light beginning to pulse in rhythm with Damon's weakened aura. You can't harvest his power without going through mine first. And my power, she smiled with grim satisfaction. My power unmakes supernatural bonds, remember? The High Priestess's eyes widened with genuine alarm as understanding dawned. No, the ritual calculations don't account for guardian interference. Then you should have killed me 20 years ago when you had the chance. Kira's power exploded outward with volcanic force, silver light filling the room and pressing against every supernatural presence within its reach. Chaim cried out as his borrowed dominance began to unravel under the assault, the artificial enhancements gifted by the circle dissolving like smoke before her awakening abilities. But her focus was on Damon, on the intricate web of curses and constraints that had been woven around his bloodline for generations. She could see them now. Dark threads of corrupted magic that had guided his family toward their predetermined fate, and with growing confidence, she began to unmake them one by one. Serafina stumbled backward, her own supernatural aura wavering as Kira's power challenged the very foundations of the circle's magic. "Stop her," she commanded her mercenaries. "Kill her now before—" But it was too late. The ancient bonds were breaking, the carefully crafted curses dissolving, and with them, the circle's control over the supernatural world began to crumble. Chapter 7. Breaking the Chains. The explosion of guardian power sent shockwaves through the ancient fortress as centuries of carefully woven curses began to unravel. Seraphina staggered backward, her immortal features contorting with rage and disbelief as the foundations of the circle's magic crumbled beneath Kira's assault. "Impossible," the high priestess snarled, her obsidian eyes blazing with fury. "The ritual bindings have held for 300 years. Your mistake was underestimating what love could accomplish," Kira replied, her voice carrying harmonics that made the very stones sing with power. Through her connection with Damon, she could feel his strength returning as each cursed thread dissolved, the artificial constraints that had doomed his bloodline falling away like broken chains. Qaim writhed on the floor, his borrowed dominance completely unraveled by her awakening abilities. Without the circle's enhancements, he appeared smaller, more human, and infinitely more pathetic. "The territory," he gasped, reaching desperately toward Seraphina. "You promised the territory would survive. Your territory is irrelevant now," the high priestess snapped, her attention fixed entirely on Kira. "As is your usefulness." With casual cruelty, she gestured toward one of her mercenaries. The man's weapon swung toward Qaim without hesitation, ending the traitor's protests with brutal efficiency. The man who had orchestrated so much suffering died as he had lived, as a tool to be discarded when no longer needed. But Kira barely registered his death. Her consciousness was expanding, touching the supernatural framework that held the entire region together. She could sense other territories, other alphas laboring under similar curses, other bloodlines carefully cultivated for eventual harvest. The scope of the circle's manipulation stretched across continents and centuries. "Do you see it now?" Seraphina asked, her voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality despite her rage. "The delicate balance we've maintained? Remove our guidance, and chaos will consume everything. Territories will war against each other, power will corrupt absolutely, and your precious supernatural world will burn. Better fire than slavery," Damon managed, his voice stronger now as more of the cursed bindings fell away. He pushed himself upright, his alpha presence blazing with restored vitality. At least in chaos, people have the chance to choose their own fate. But even as his power returned, Kira could sense the toll her efforts were taking. Each curse she unraveled required tremendous energy, and there were so many, layer upon layer of manipulation stretching back through generations of his family. The Blackridge bloodline had been particularly targeted, their power shaped and constrained to serve the Circle's long-term plans. Outside the fortress, she became aware of another battle raging. Elder Silas had rallied the pack members who remained loyal to Damon, and they were fighting desperately against the Circle's forces. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing supernatural opponents whose power had been stolen from dozens of murdered alphas. "Your little rebellion ends here," Seraphina declared, raising her hands as dark energy began to coalesce around her fingers. "Guardian bloodline or not, you're still mortal, still killable." The attack came like a lance of pure shadow, aimed directly at Kira's heart. But Damon moved faster, his restored power allowing him to intercept the deadly magic with his own body. The dark energy struck him full in the chest, sending him crashing into the stone wall with bone-crushing force. "No!" Kira's scream carried such power that several of the mercenaries collapsed, overwhelmed by the psychic backlash. Her silver light exploded outward with volcanic intensity. But this time it wasn't just guardian magic. It was something new. Something born from the fusion of her awakening abilities with the mate bond she shared with Damon. She could feel him dying, the stolen magic eating away at his life force like acid. But she could also feel their connection, stronger than ever now that his cursed bindings were gone. Without conscious thought, she poured her own energy into him, using their bond to share not just power, but life itself. The feedback loop that resulted was unlike anything in recorded supernatural history. Guardian magic flowed into alpha strength, which amplified and reflected back as purified power. The combination created a resonance that shattered every remaining curse in the fortress and beyond, sending waves of liberation across the entire region. Serafina screamed as her immortal existence suddenly became mortal again. The stolen power that had sustained her for centuries was being stripped away, dissolved by the very forces she had tried to harness. Around her, the remaining mercenaries collapsed as their artificial enhancements failed, leaving them as merely human soldiers facing supernatural fury. "What have you done?" the former high priestess demanded, her ageless features already beginning to show the weight of her true years. "Do you have any idea what you've unleashed?" "Freedom," Kira replied simply, helping Damon to his feet. His injury was healing rapidly now, their shared power accelerating his supernatural recovery beyond normal limits. "I've given everyone the freedom to choose their own path instead of following your predetermined script." But even as victory seemed within reach, Kira felt a new threat approaching. The Circle hadn't put all their resources into this single extraction. There were backup plans, contingencies that stretched across multiple continents. And now that their primary strategy had failed, they would resort to scorched earth tactics. Through the fortress's ancient stones, she sensed explosives being planted by retreating mercenaries. Not enough to completely destroy the stronghold, but sufficient to bring down the communications center and trap anyone inside. Serafina's final gambit. If she couldn't have Kira, she would ensure the Guardian died with her secrets intact. "The building," Damon warned, his enhanced senses picking up the same threat. "They're going to—" The first explosion cut off his words, sending tremors through the floor beneath their feet. Dust rained from the ceiling as ancient mortar began to crack under the strain. They had minutes at most before the entire wing came down. "This way," Elder Silas's voice carried from the doorway, the old man appearing despite the chaos raging throughout the fortress. "I've secured an exit route, but we need to move now." Behind him, several pack members waited with barely concealed desperation. They had fought bravely against impossible odds. But the cost had been enormous. Too many good people had died because of Kayam's betrayal and the Circle's ambitions. As they began to move toward safety, Serafina's bitter laughter echoed behind them. "Run then, little Guardian. But remember, we are not the only ones who covet your power. There are forces in this world that make the Circle seem benevolent by comparison. Your victory tonight has announced your existence to every supernatural predator on the planet." Her words carried the weight of prophecy, but Kira refused to let fear paralyze her. She had spent 20 years running from her destiny, letting others define her path and limit her choices. That ended now. "Let them come," she said, her voice carrying across the collapsing room with absolute determination. "I'm done hiding from what I am." The second explosion was larger, bringing down a section of the outer wall and filling the air with choking dust. But by then, Kira and her allies had reached Elder Silas's escape route, a hidden passage that led through the fortress's foundations to emerge in the forest beyond. As they ran through the ancient tunnels, Kira could feel the supernatural landscape around them continuing to change. Her power was still active, still unraveling the Circle's influence wherever it touched. Across multiple territories, Alphas were experiencing sudden freedom from constraints they hadn't even known existed. The ripple effects would be felt for generations. Behind them, the fortress shuddered as more explosives detonated, but the ancient stones held, testament to the strength of the bloodline that had built them and the power that now flowed freely through their foundations. They emerged into moonlight to find a battle-scarred but triumphant pack waiting for them. The Circle's forces had been routed, their supernatural advantages stripped away by Kira's power. Those few who survived were fleeing into the night, carrying news of their defeat to whatever remained of their organization. "The territory is secure," Elder Silas reported, his weathered face showing both relief and profound sadness for the losses they had suffered. "But the cost will be remembered," Damon promised, his arm around Kira as they stood together beneath the stars. "Every life lost tonight will be honored, and their sacrifice will not be in vain." As if summoned by his words, representatives from neighboring territories began to arrive. Alphas and pack leaders drawn by the supernatural shockwaves that had emanated from the fortress. They came seeking answers, demanding explanations for the night's unprecedented events. But for the first time in decades, They came as equals rather than potential victims of an invisible puppet master's schemes. The circle's reign of manipulation was over, and the supernatural world would never be the same. Chapter 8. The New Dawn. 6 months had passed since the night that changed everything, and the morning sun cast golden light across a transformed Blackridge territory. From her position on the private balcony of the Alpha's quarters, Kira watched the daily training sessions in the courtyard below, where young pack members learned not just combat techniques, but the principles of consensual leadership that had become the foundation of their new society. The physical scars of that terrible night had long since healed, but the deeper changes continued to ripple outward like stones thrown into still water. The fortress itself bore testament to renewal. Damaged walls had been rebuilt stronger than before, and new wings had been added to accommodate the steady stream of refugees from territories still struggling to adapt to their sudden freedom from the Circle's manipulation. "Admiring your handiwork?" Damon's voice carried warmth and amusement as he joined her on the balcony, 2 steaming cups of coffee in his hands. "Admiring our handiwork," she corrected, accepting the offered cup and leaning into his solid warmth. The mate bond between them had only grown stronger over the months, creating a partnership that went far beyond romantic connection. Where once Blackridge territory had been ruled by a single Alpha's will, it was now governed by shared decision-making that drew on both their strengths. Below them, Elder Silas was instructing a group of young adults in the art of pack negotiation, his weathered face animated with enthusiasm for teaching skills that had been suppressed for generations under the Circle's influence. The old man had become something of a legend throughout the supernatural community, the loyal elder who had exposed a traitor's true nature and helped save the guardian who freed them all. "Any word from the Northern Territories?" Kira asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer from the slight tension that entered Damon's shoulders. "Still struggling with the transition," he confirmed, his expression growing more serious. 3 different claimants for Alpha succession, and without the Circle's artificial constraints, the competition is getting violent. They've requested mediation. It was a pattern they had seen repeated across the continent, as territories tried to adapt to genuine self-governance after centuries of invisible manipulation. Some, like Blackridge, had thrived under the new freedoms. Others had descended into chaos as suppressed ambitions and ancient grudges suddenly exploded into open conflict. "The Academy?" she suggested, and saw his nod of agreement. The Blackridge Academy for Supernatural Governance had been Kira's brainchild, though it had required Damon's political connections to make it reality. Located in the rebuilt east wing of the fortress, it trained mediators, counselors, and leaders in the principles of consensual authority and collaborative decision-making. Their graduates were in high demand across the supernatural world. "Elena graduated yesterday," Damon mentioned, referring to one of their most promising students, a young woman whose own territory had been devastated by the Circle's manipulations. "She's volunteering for the Northern assignment." "She's ready," Kira agreed, though she felt the familiar pang of maternal protectiveness toward all their students. Each one represented hope for a better future, but also a reminder of how much work remained to be done. A soft knock at the balcony door interrupted their morning routine. "Come in," Damon called, and one of the newer pack members entered with the careful deference of someone still adjusting to the informality of their leadership style. "Alpha, Luna," the young man said, using the titles that had evolved organically within their pack structure. "Representatives from the Western Reaches have arrived for the territorial summit. They're anxious to begin negotiations." Kira exchanged a glance with Damon, reading the subtext in their messenger's tone. The Western Reaches had been one of the territories most devastated by the Circle's collapse, and their desperation was making them aggressive in their territorial claims. "Show them to the Great Hall," Damon instructed. "We'll be down shortly." As the messenger departed, Kira felt the familiar flutter of movement in her abdomen. At 4 months pregnant, she was just beginning to show, though her enhanced healing abilities had made the early stages remarkably comfortable. The child they had created would be unprecedented, the offspring of a freed Alpha bloodline and an awakened guardian, with potential that even Kira's enhanced senses couldn't fully predict. "Are you sure you're up for a full day of territorial negotiations?" Damon asked, his protective instincts showing, despite his careful respect for her independence. "The baby seems to enjoy the political drama," she replied with a smile, placing her hand over the slight swell of her stomach. "Besides, Someone needs to keep you from making too many concessions out of guilt over the circle's legacy. It was a gentle tease, but it touched on a real dynamic in their relationship. Damon's sense of responsibility for the supernatural community's struggles sometimes led him to offer more assistance than their own territory could reasonably provide. Kira's role was often to provide the perspective of someone who had grown up outside pack politics, seeing situations with clearer eyes. The Great Hall had been transformed since that terrible night 6 months ago. Where once it had been a display of alpha dominance, it was now configured for collaborative discussion. The traditional raised platform had been replaced with a circular arrangement that put all participants on equal footing, and the ancient weapons displays had given way to artwork created by pack members and academy students. Representatives from a dozen territories had gathered for this summit, their faces showing the strain of 6 months of unprecedented change. Some, like Alpha Morrison's widow from the Eastern Mountains, radiated the confidence of leaders who had successfully adapted to their new freedoms. Others, particularly the delegation from the Western Reaches, carried the desperate edge of people whose authority was still being challenged daily. Before we begin formal negotiations, Kira addressed the assembled group, her voice carrying the harmonics that had become her trademark. I want to acknowledge what we've all lost. The Circle's manipulations cost us friends, family, and centuries of authentic development. We're all struggling to build something new from the wreckage of their deceptions. A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. It was important to acknowledge the grief before moving forward. A lesson Kira had learned from her own journey of accepting her past while choosing her future. But we're also here because of what we've gained. Damon continued seamlessly, their partnership so integrated that they often completed each other's thoughts during public addresses. Freedom to make our own choices, form our own alliances, and determine our own destinies. That's what we're here to protect and extend. The negotiations that followed were complex and sometimes heated, but they were also genuine in a way that supernatural politics hadn't been for centuries. Without the Circle's invisible hand guiding events toward predetermined outcomes, every agreement had to be earned through honest discussion and mutual benefit. By evening, they had achieved something unprecedented, a voluntary alliance structure that respected territorial sovereignty while providing mutual support for security and resource sharing. It wasn't perfect, and it would require constant adjustment and renegotiation, but it was theirs. As the representatives departed with copies of the provisional agreements, Kira and Damon found themselves alone in the Great Hall as the last light of day faded from the tall windows. "Do you ever miss it?" Damon asked quietly, his arm around her as they stood where Serafina had made her final stand. The simplicity of not knowing what you were, of not carrying responsibility for an entire world's freedom? Kira considered the question seriously. There were certainly days when the weight of expectation felt crushing, when every territory's problem seemed to land on their doorstep, when the constant demand for her unique abilities left her exhausted. Sometimes, she admitted, but then I think about the alternative. Spending my whole life running from something I didn't understand. Never knowing my parents died trying to protect not just me, but everyone like us. Never knowing that love could be this powerful. She turned in his arms, studying the face that had become more precious to her than life itself. The mate bond between them was no longer just about supernatural connection. It was about choosing each other every day, building something beautiful from shared strength and complementary weaknesses. Besides, she added with a smile that carried just a hint of mischief, someone has to keep you from turning into one of those brooding, solitary alpha types who think they have to carry the world's weight alone. His laughter echoed through the ancient hall, rich and warm and free. No danger of that with you around. As they made their way to their private quarters, Kira paused at the memorial wall they had erected to honor those lost during the Circle's reign of manipulation. Kayim's name was there too, not because they forgave his betrayal, but because they refused to erase the lessons his choices had taught them about the dangers of unchecked ambition. He was right about one thing, she murmured, her hand resting on her growing belly. We are building something without precedent. A supernatural society based on cooperation instead of domination, on choice instead of predetermined fate. And our child will grow up never knowing what it was like to live under invisible chains, Damon added, his own hand covering hers. That's a legacy worth fighting for. Later, As they lay together beneath the stars visible through their bedroom's enlarged windows, Kira felt the baby's movement quicken in response to her emotional contentment. This child would be born into a world of challenges, but also infinite possibilities. They would inherit not just supernatural power, but the knowledge that such power was meaningless without the wisdom to use it in service of others. The circle's defeat had marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. What they built from here would determine whether the supernatural world would fulfill its potential for greatness or collapse back into the cycles of violence and manipulation that had characterized so much of its history. But as she drifted toward sleep, surrounded by Damon's protective warmth and the profound peace of their transformed territory, Kira felt only hope for the future they were creating together. A future where love was stronger than ambition, where cooperation triumphed over domination, and where every supernatural being had the chance to choose their own destiny. The new dawn had broken, and it was beautiful. The Guardian bloodline may be free, but across the supernatural territories, other ancient powers still sleep, waiting for awakening. Forgotten legacies and buried secrets call out for discovery in a world forever changed by one woman's courage. These untold tales of transformation are waiting to be discovered. By not subscribing, you're leaving these stories in darkness, these voices unheard. A true member of our pack never abandons those still struggling in the shadows. If this story touched your heart, we have an entire collection waiting for you. Tales of forbidden bonds, second chances, and supernatural love that defies all odds. Hit that subscribe button to join our storytelling family and never miss when we release our next emotional journey. Until our paths cross again in the next tale. Thank you for being here with us tonight.